Okay.
All right, we're on. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to be creating some CLI plugins, so get excited. My name is Thomas Dvornik. I'm the technical lead on the CLI team, the Salesforce CLI. Next to me, a lot of you guys may recognize the man sitting next to me, Dave Carroll. He's actually just hit his 15-year mark at Salesforce. Woo! Woo! So he ran developer evangelism for a very long time, and now he's leading product for CLI and some other tools at Salesforce. Before we get going, it wouldn't be a talk without the forward-looking statement. We are going to be talking about some beta features. Just make sure you make all purchasing decisions not based on what you hear today. Now, first I want to get just a little bit of gauge of who you guys are. So how many of you here have actually used a command line shell or terminal? Awesome, about what I expected. How many of you guys have used the Salesforce CLI? I would imagine that would be most of you, yep. And most of you guys who have used the CLI, have you ever wished there was another command, another feature, another, yep. All right, so pretty good. So obviously that's what we're going to be addressing here today, right, is how to increase the functionality of the CLI, customize it, work through it. Before we jump into that, Dave's going to quickly talk about why we should be using the CLI.
Yeah, sure. So this is a question that we get a lot is, well, you guys created these plugins, but why do I care? I mean, what benefit is it to me to extend the CLI? And the benefit really is twofold. One, we have a lot of functionality in there. It's pretty general. If you want specific functionality, you can take advantage of not only the CLI, but what Thomas is going to talk about in a minute, which is our SFDX core libraries, to specifically cater to your needs around integration, around automation, and then be able to plug that into the CLI. The advantage of that is when you're doing these automations, test runs, and things like that, if you can just install one CLI, it's better than installing multiple CLIs, right? It's less moving parts. Also, the flexible interfaces that we give you make it really easy. So if something's easy, why not give it a try? That's always my mantra. But also because, we're Salesforce, and we pretty much give the developer things that can be customized, right? It's the whole point of the platform. And so that philosophy carries on through also with our CLI. And so those are the main reasons. If you guys have questions, go ahead and shout them out now before the demo, because when we get to the demo, we got a lot of cool things to show you. So here's a 30-second history of the CLI. We started this project back in 2016, announcement at Dreamforce, and then, or actually I think, was it Dreamforce?
Yeah, I think the announcement was Dreamforce,
yeah. Yeah, Dreamforce. And then we began a closed pilot in February, open beta in June, went GA in 2017, in October at Dreamforce, and now we're here with our plugin and core beta. The reason why I want to show you this is because one of the other things that one of the reasons for using the CLI in the first place is to increase not only the velocity of what you're building, but the reliability of it. And we've taken that to heart in the velocity of the way that we've produced this CLI. So we're right in alignment with that. So in thinking about building a plugin for the CLI, there's a couple of questions that people commonly ask that could be answered with, it could be a plugin. So, is there a DX command that takes a snapshot of metadata from a production org? Well, we don't have that command today, but you could easily create it as a plugin. I've looked at the data tree export. I think it's probably not as useful to me as it could be. Well, feel free to create a plugin that takes it a step further. On that note, we plan on doing a lot of work around that in the future, but we'll get to that in the roadmap slide. And there's a lot of questions that one of the things that you can think of is can it be a plugin? And I know that might sound a little bit like we're passing the buck on to you, but in reality, the framework that you're going to see here is so graceful and so easy to use that these actually become very low hurdles to get over. Right, so let's talk about the framework a little bit.
Yeah, so to build plugins, we're going to utilize two pieces of technology. The first being OCLIF, which stands for Open CLI Framework. You may have heard this at the keynote or a session that was yesterday, but this is something that Heroku just pushed out. And so it's, again, a framework to build CLIs, and it's really, really easy to use. Heroku has been in the business of CLIs for years and years and years and years, and their Heroku CLI is built on top of this. And so when Salesforce looked at building a CLI, we want to utilize their expertise in order to build our own. So we built the Salesforce CLI on top of theirs and on top of the OCLIF framework. So even though it's new and it's open sourced, a lot of the code has been around for a long time because of how long they've been building CLIs for. So if you want to build your own CLI without using any Salesforce functionality or anything, you could easily take advantage of this framework. But for us, this wasn't enough, because if you're going to build something for Salesforce, you need stuff like an OR connection. And so instead of having you guys manage authentication, connections, all of that stuff yourself, we already had that all on the forced command. So if you run sfdx force blah, we take care of a lot of that for you. So we pulled all that functionality out into a core library. And that's what the core library is. It will handle authentication, OR connections, project management, configuration, a lot of stuff that we do specifically for Salesforce and open it up to you guys. Another thing that does is consistent UX. So the way we manage JSON output and flag inputs and all of that, you'll get a lot of that for free. So let's go and take a look at what some of that looks like in a demo. I'm going to go ahead and jump into a shell. And first off, I'm just going to run the sfdx command. Oh, yeah. This is what happens.
Demo reset.
Yep, this is what happens when you don't reset your demo. So let's just go ahead and uninstall the plugin that we are going to build today.
How many of you were in the TDX product keynote? I apologize for that. Thank you for not being too harsh.
All right, so now if we run sfdx, you will see that we get some output. The force command you guys have already seen a lot of. Plugins have been in there for a long time. We just haven't supported really building Salesforce plugins because we were working on those core libraries. And then, of course, update. And if we go ahead and look at the plugins commands, you'll see install, link, the things that have been there for a while. But now you have this plugins generate. And so this is the scaffolding you need to quickly create a sfdx plugin. So we're going to run that. And we'll call it TDX. And what that's going to do is it's going to prompt me for a bunch of questions. And for now, I'm just going to go ahead and accept a lot of the defaults. You can go ahead and fill these in. But what this will do is it will create a bunch of files for me. And then it's going to go ahead and install all of the dependencies. Now, throughout here, you're going to see references to OCLIF. And remember, that's because we're using the OCLIF framework to do this for us. So this is an OCLIF plugin generator that we've extended to include all of the Salesforce core libraries within it. So let's go and cd into our new plugin that we just created. Now, there's two different ways to run this. The first being a local bin run. And what this is it's an isolated shell around your commands. So if I run it, you'll see that it looks very similar to when I just ran sfdx, right? You have your list of commands, some usage, version, and here's a command that it scaffolded for me. The second way is to actually run it within the Salesforce CLI, and I'll show you how to do that in a little bit.
So if I could just interject, bin run is really, really great when you're building your plugin and doing automated testing on your plugin, because you can run it in isolation. You can separate any kind of errors that you might have from anything that might also be in the CLI, and so that way you can get confident runs in your testing.
Exactly. And so if we go ahead and look at the help, you'll see a lot of stuff, again, is generated for us, right? So we have a description, usage, and a bunch of flags. Now, for those of you that have used the CLI a lot, you'll notice that these flags look very familiar. And these are the flags that are in all of our Salesforce CLI commands. So if we go ahead and take a look at what the code looks like, we'll first go ahead and look at the structure. Now, there's a lot of stuff that was generated for us. I'm not going to go over all of this, but I'll highlight a couple. One is a package.json. This is what is required for to do npms, which is how we install stuff in the Salesforce CLI. In here, you'll see name, version, some of the stuff that was prompted for me, along with all of the dependencies, which is fine. Again, you see some references to Oak Cliff. There's some Oak Cliff-specific stuff in here, and then a bunch of default scripts to help us manage our CLI lifecycle.
So in case it wasn't evident, Node.js is the platform in which we build plugins on. And as you'll see, we've also kind of standard on TypeScript, which is not necessarily required, but what's generated is. Yep. And there's a lot of good reasons for that.
Exactly. And you'll see as I navigate through the code, stuff like code completion, all of that is given to us from TypeScript, which is one of the main reasons why we use it. We generate a README for you too. You'll see a lot of broken links on here because these are not yet created, but these are links to services that you guys can use if you want to manage your plugin, such as CI, code coverage, vulnerabilities, right? So these are, again, services that you can use out of the box if you want. If you don't want them, you just remove all that stuff from your README. We also give you configurations files to help you integrate with those services faster if you did want to use them. And then you'll notice that we have some generated documentation. So here we have, again, all of the commands that you saw us run in the CLI. And then we also have some information on debugging your plugin. I'll show you how to debug your plugin in a little bit. So let's go ahead and look at some of the source code. Here we have a source folder. Because it's TypeScript, this is generated into JavaScript in the lib folder. But we're going to look at the source. We have commands, and here you see our topic and our command. So remember I typed in hello:org, and this is how the structure is organized. If we look at the command itself, let's take a look at some of the generated code. So you'll see here we're including an Oak Cliff command, but we're only using the flags. And the reason why we're only using the flags is because we are extending the Oak Cliff command in our Salesforce command. And the reason why you would use the sfdx command is because, again, we inject a lot of that functionality for you out of the box. So some of the properties that we give you, again, here's all the examples you saw, the description. Here you can see we're defining our class, or our command, which extends the sfdx command. So down here, we see we have some arguments. We have some flags that we're defining ourselves. So when we look back at the example here, you see here are the two commands that we define that are custom to our own command. Now, these are all the ones we got for free. And we got those for free by setting requires username to true. And what this does is it will inject those flags for us and go ahead and manage that during the lifecycle. So if a user doesn't specify a username, we'll try to get it from the default that's set by the Salesforce CLI. And so you can see that down here when we're calling this.org. This.org was added onto us for us by the sfdx command. Now, this is guaranteed to be here because we set requires to true. If I wanted a username but I didn't necessarily need it, I could do supports username, which again will not make it required. And you can see that with the hub org that we did. And here we have to check because it's not guaranteed because we did supports hub org, not requires hub org. So again, some different customizations you guys can do to include stuff you want. There was also a property in here called requires project, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So here we get the org, then we get the connection to the org, and then from here I can query. So we're going to do a basic query on organization. We're going to create a little TypeScript structure for us so that we know what properties we're going to have. We're going to use that to cast our query results. And then we're going to go ahead, this runs a query, we're going to wait for it to come back. And then now we can go ahead and do all of that, get all the properties, and then we're going to output that information. So this.ux is another library for you guys to use that will help with user experiences on the shell, right? So outputting, inputting. And so let's go ahead and take a look at what this command looks like. So if we run it from the bin run, it's going to use my default scratch org, which I have displayed in my prompt. It's going to go ahead and query that information, and now I have all the information on there. Now, just to kind of show you guys something a little bit more live, if in here I were to say this.ux.stylized header, trailhead. Now, if we go ahead and rerun this, you'll see that now we have the stylized header. And this is some of the
yeah, and that stylized header actually matches the style that we implement inside the Salesforce CLI.
Yeah.
And what you didn't see was a lot of error handling and checking if values exist on those required or uses kind of flags. We'll bust out an error before we even get to the part that you're running, that you're coding, so you don't have to worry about checking for those things.
And the powerful thing of this is that all of you guys who are used to how the Salesforce commands work, now if there's a plugin that uses a SFDX command, you'll kind of be familiar with how they work too. And so to even illustrate this, I could even run SFDX force config list. This is going to print out my current configuration. So here you can see that my default username is indeed the scratch org, which is how I'm getting this information right here. And then just to really, really confirm, if I were to do org display, which displays all the information on my current org, and really all I care about right now is the name. So this is going to print out all the information of my org and print out that my org name is company, which is the same exact one that was used in my plugin. So again, all of this kind of management for you of organizations and authorization and all of that is all handled for you out of the box. Now another thing we do to standardize inputs and outputs is a JSON flag. So if we look at JSON, the reason why you would want your command to output JSON is so that other commands and other scripts can easily build on top of yours. And this is why we offer it in the first place. So you'll notice that there was no actual output like it was here. Instead, we get a JSON object, which has these two top-level properties, which are standard for all Salesforce commands, right? We have a status, so it's 0 because it was successful. It would be greater than 1, or 1 or greater if it was an error. And then we have the results. And this is what the command is returning itself. So if we look back at the code, we see that here we're returning an object. And the reason why we're doing this is so that it can be used in --JSON. And this is so that all of your commands can, again, follow the same standards that the Salesforce CLI does as well.
And just notice that there's no status or result object in there. So we inject that into that structure so that it's consistent every time that you run a command.
Yep. And so that's the basic structure of a command. So here you kind of saw some general things that generated for us. If I were to go ahead and look at an Apex test run help, you'll see that it actually does have those same flags. The descriptions are the same. Again, trying to standardize on all of this across it. You'll see JSON and log level. So these are some things to help out. Now, one of the comments in that slide with all the different quotes, a customer wanted to fail an Apex test run command if the code coverage was below a certain number. And so that's not built into the current command right now. And
maybe one day.
Maybe one day.
We'll see.
But in the time being, it could be a plugin. Now, hooking into the current commands is something that's coming a little bit later, and we'll show that in the roadmap. But one thing you can do is you can create a new command to check the code coverage. So the flow here would be you create your scratch org, you push all your source, you run your Apex test, and then you run another command to check for the coverage. And if it fails, it will fail your CI builds, right? So let's go ahead and build that. Now to build that, I want to reuse some of the core libraries that we're doing. So if we go ahead and go back to our browser, here are some of the core library documentation that we have.
What's the URL for this? Oh, we've got it on the resource.
We got it on the resource side, yeah. And so you can see there's a lot of information in here that you already saw. For example, org. This.org is an instance of the org object, which has a connection object already initialized for you. That is using auth.info to manage how we manage auth. So again, if you want to really break into the lower level functionality, really customize your plugin, you can do that, or you can utilize the stuff we just give you out of the box. There's also some information on here on project. So I mentioned that requires project, and for those of you that have worked in Salesforce DX, you know that a Salesforce DX project is specified by the sfdx-project.json file. That is how we determine whether we're in a project or not. And so this will do some of that for me, like retrieve the project.json. So another thing this customer wanted to do was that he wanted to store a code coverage number in the JSON that he can check into source control. So that way each project could have a different code coverage requirement. Maybe one is something that they're just kind of working out. It's in beta. So they're like, okay, we'll just have the code coverage requirement be like 60%, but then anything production ready, we want to be 80%, for example. So we're going to go ahead and utilize this to also help build our plugin. So let's go ahead and go back to VS Code. And let's create a new command. So in the commands, we're going to create a new folder here, and we're going to call it TDX. Inside of here, we're going to create another folder called Apex.
Yeah, and the framework creates a new topic every time it sees a new folder within commands. So you don't have to define it anywhere as a topic or anything like that. It's determined automatically for you.
Yep. So now we just built a brand new command that is going to be sfdx tdx : apex : coverage : check. All right. We're going to go ahead and copy all of this code and just use it in our check. And we're going to remove a bunch of the stuff that we don't want. This is all the generated code, and we're going to build our own. So we'll get rid of all of that. For now, we'll get rid of the example too. That's not really related to us. We'll fix the description later. Args, we don't need any arguments, but we do want a flag. And what we're going to do here, there's two different ways that we could approach this problem. One is we could actually query the org for, let's say, the Apex code coverage and do it that way. But since we know the Apex tests are going to be ran beforehand, we're going to utilize the fact that it stores coverage information for us. So if we look back at our help, you'll see that here we have -- code coverage, and then here we have -- output directory, which stores all that information in a directory. So let's just go ahead and utilize that information that's already there for us. If we look at a project, I have a simple project already set up here. And so you can see we have some classes, pages, and some tests. Now, I already ran the Apex test with those fields or those flags specified, and that created a results directory for me. And in here, you'll see code coverage. So let's go ahead and look at that. So we want results, code coverage. And so it's an array of objects that have information for each class that's covered, including all the lines and all that information. We're just going to look at the percentages. All right, so let's go ahead and utilize that in our code. So here we're going to say we want to specify a coverage file. We'll go ahead and give it a shorthand F. We don't need force, so we'll delete that. And since we're not going to be querying the orgs, we don't really need these either, so we'll delete those. But we do want a project. So when you looked at that tree, you saw that I had an SFDX project JSON. And that's because if you're running tests, you're probably going to be running tests from a project. So we're going to go ahead and require that so that we can guarantee that they're working on a project. And then now we can go ahead and start figuring out how we're going to check this. So first I want a coverage requirement. And we'll set that equal to 70% for right now. And then I'm going to go ahead and utilize a library called Lodash. If you haven't heard of that, it's just a really useful utility. So we'll go ahead and do Lodash. Okay. So now I can go ahead and use Lodash to iterate. You can, if you would rather use native functions, you can do that. So we'll do, first we need to read the file. So let's go ahead and read the file. So we'll do const. Again, I'm going to use the core libraries. So one of the things I haven't showed you is we actually have a utility class. And one of the utilities is a read JSON. So instead of doing that and parsing the JSON myself, I'm just going to call this library, and we'll call it this.flags.coverage file. Now, I want to, since I'm relying that this flag is set, I want to make it required. Now, Oak Cliff already lets you do that, so I'll just change this to requires equals true. Let's see, required true. And now I'm guaranteed before my run command even runs, I'm going to have that flag set. Now, if it points to an invalid file, read JSON will appropriately throw an error, which the SFDX command will grab and handle for me. So I don't need to do any error handling here because I want to go back out to the terminal. And now I'm ready to read this. Actually, I have to wait for this because it is a async operation to read a file. So now we have our coverages. I'm going to iterate over each one of those. And now I can actually check if the coverage total covered is less than the coverage requirement. Then I'm just going to throw an error. Now, another thing we offer in the core libraries is an SFDX error. and it provides a little bit more functionality so that the SFDX command knows how to display the error properly in the same format as all the Salesforce commands.
As well as set the status for you on your JSON output.
Exactly. And so if we do the coverage for coverage name is less than the coverage requirement, then we're going to fail. And if it got through all of this, then we know we were successful. So let's go and do this.ux.log, and we'll say success. Okay. And that's it. So now I'm going to go ahead and run this command. Now I'm popping up the integrated terminal within VS Code. And remember I said there's two ways to run this. One is with bin run. So if I go ahead and run bin run TDX, Apex, coverage, check. And that's, so one thing you have to do is, since it's JavaScript or TypeScript, you have to compile it. So let's go ahead and run prepare, which will compile that JavaScript for me. And then it's also going to make sure all the help and everything is generated for Oak Cliff. Now I should be able to run the command. And the first thing you see is a big error, and that's because it says missing required flag. Now, it printed out the stack trace because I'm in a development mode right now, but it says missing required flag, which is exactly what we want. So if I do the file, the next thing you're going to notice is that it says the command is required to run from within an SFDS project. Because remember, I set that to true. And the one I'm in right now is a plugin project, not an SFDS project. So if I switch over to that project I was in, I don't really want to figure out the absolute path to this bin run script. So instead, I want to run it through SFDX. So if we run SFDX plugins link and just give it to the path to the plugin I want, it's going to ensure that the dependencies are there, that the prepare script is ran, and now this command can be run from within Salesforce DX. So if we go back to the terminal, we're going to go ahead and run SFDX, TDX, Apex, coverage, check. We'll give it the file. And now, again, it's going to just double check. It will only do this whenever I modify a file. But now you see that I'm no such file or directory. And this is because the read JSON is throwing an error that is handled by the command. So let's give it a valid file. We'll do results. Give it the code coverage. And now I get an error saying that the coverage is less than 70. But up here I can see it's 100. So let's figure out exactly what went wrong. The command gives you an option called dev suspend. And this is talked about in that README that I talked about. And what this will do is it will hang the node process so that you can attach a debugger to it. So we're using just a standard node protocol. So if you have your own preference debugger, you can use that. I'm going to use the one within VS Code. As part of the generated project, we actually generate a config for you, or a launch configuration for you up here in VS Code. So I'm going to go ahead and use that to debug. First, I need to set a breakpoint. Let's close that. We'll set a breakpoint right here. And now if I run, it's going to connect to that node process, set up my debugger, and hang. All right? So now I'm here. I can play to my breakpoint. And here I can see coverage, covered. Oh, so total covered. Here I wanted coverage percentage. Instead, I was using the lines, which I don't want to use. So if I replace that, now I should be able to go back here, run my command again without the dev suspend, and you'll see it says success. So again, it ran the prepare because I modified a file. So let's do that for me.
--JSON?
Sure, yeah. So if we run it with --JSON, always a good practice when you're building commands to check, you'll see that I'm not returning anything. And that's because in my command, I didn't return anything. So if you could provide whatever you think would be useful to people who might want to extend your plugin. One thing that's easy is I could just return coverages, right? But you could also, if you're doing additional processing, or if you also wanted the coverage requirement, just so people know what the current value is, you could do that. Now, I mentioned that one of the things he wanted to do was to read this from that SFDS project.json. So let's figure out what that would look like. Here we can just do const project.json, and we're going to go ahead and read the this.project, which is set because I said requires project is true. And here's going to be those objects that we saw in the documentation, right? So in the documentation, we saw the retrieves SFDS project.json. I'm going to read that. And now I have a property that I can use to get what I want. Now, we always recommend if you're storing anything in the project.json to store it in a property called plugins, because we control that top-level structure, and we don't want everyone to override things that we add in there later. So if you're building a plugin, we want you to namespace it to a plugins property. And so we're going to go ahead and read that. So if I went ahead and said, here, we were going to do this afterwards. And I'm going to say get, and here I'm going to say the plugins, the project JSON dot get. Again, I want the plugins property because I said you should store everything in there. And then from there, we're going to try to get the TDX property and the coverage requirement. So the nice thing about the load-get is that it will go ahead and try to go through the object for me, and if any level of this is undefined, it will just return undefined. So now if this is not specified in the project.json, this will gracefully just use 70% as a default, okay? So now that I have that set in here, we should be able to go ahead and give it a run. So we'll go back here, we'll rerun the command. So again, I'm preparing because I changed the file. And now it says the coverage requirement is less than 120. Obviously, 120% is not realistic, but just because the coverage was already 100%, I decided to use that number to show you. So if we look at the SFDX project.json, you'll notice that I already put in a coverage requirement of 120%, okay? So it's in the plugins property. It's in my own namespace property called TDX, and then my own property to configure my plugin, which is called coverage requirement. And so you can see there's a quick way that you can add some properties that customers can check into their own project.json. There's also in the core library stuff that uses the SFDX config, so that you can use stuff from the actual Salesforce config when you do config set and get. So again, a lot of powerful stuff in the core libraries for you to be able to build your plugins. All right. So what exactly did you guys see? Some takeaways are, again, everything in the CLI can be and probably should be customized. As you guys use it, there may be some commands that don't quite do what you want, and so you should really customize it, either through environment variables or plugins, right? And so the plugin generator is a really easy way to get started really, really, really quickly. So again, we highly encourage you guys to use it, give us feedback. We'll be iterating on this very, very fast. And the last kind of takeaway is that you guys can do it, right? So you saw how easy it was. Don't be afraid to build them, and if you build something you think is useful, don't be afraid to share it with the community, right? All you got to do is deploy it to NPM, and now anybody can install it in the Salesforce CLI by just doing a plugins install name of your plugin. So it's a very easy way to distribute this stuff among the community.
So how was that demo? Pretty good? Better than the product keynote? I think hopefully you'll agree with me that what we've created here with Oak Cliff and with the SFDX core really makes it kind of a reasonable proposition to create plugins to extend. Now remember, the plugin that we just created would be executed immediately after your test run in your CI build environment, right? And so that will fail if it doesn't meet the criteria. And of course, it looks and feels and acts like a Salesforce DX plugin. So what's coming up in the future? This is really the reason why we have the forward-looking statement slide. You know, we see what's here in spring, the CLI beta and the SFDX core beta. We're really looking to get feedback while we're in this beta period on the functionality, what's missing, what's not working for you, that kind of stuff. So if you're building plugins, please take yourself to the success community and let us know what is missing. I think we're using the DX group on the success community. So in summer 18, we're going to be bringing out something called command hooks. And these are plugins that you create that can hook into before and after execute of other plugins. So if that was available today, you could imagine this plugin, instead of being on another line or piping the output of the test run to that plugin command, it would just attach itself to the Apex test run command and then execute that way. Attach it to the post run command, for instance. And then, of course, we want to get this, the plugins and the core library to GA by summer so that it's very stable and ready to go. And then, been hearing a lot about data import for the development process. I know that this is a very important topic, and we have a little bit of ways to go. So we're targeting some kind of improvement for data import, export, and synthesis in winter 19. We also have a lot of other plans, but we decided to leave them off for now. So how do you learn more about this? Clearly, there's some Trailhead. We don't have a specific plugins generate Trailhead yet. That's on the list of things to do. But there's a lot of other things that you can do around DX if you're just starting your journey with DX. And also, there's some resources here. The plugin generator will be an open source project, I believe, as of Friday, if not Monday next week. Everything is ready to go. We just want to double check that everything's perfect. And then the core library, of course, is not open source but we will be, you can get to the documentation of it here. And so with that, we actually have a few minutes for questions. And there was a lot of information here. There's got to be a question or two, I would think.
You mentioned that you had properties in the JSON project, JSON. Could you rate them from the...
So let's repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question was around the project JSON, if we added what?
So did you rate from the plugin, did you rate them properties too?
No, you can. So with that project object, you can actually manipulate the SFDX project.json from code. And this example, I didn't. This example, I have already manually added that property to my project.json file, and it was already there for me to use when I ran the command, so it's a little thing I did to make the demo go a little bit smoother. But yes, you can edit that in code if you want.
And then you've also got the home.sfdx, you can get access to them properties?
Yeah, so there are libraries to manipulate the global space. So if you wanted to create a file or use a different file that is owned by SFDX in the global space so all projects can utilize it, there are libraries to help you do that too. Yep.
Okay, at the microphone.
Hi, I just converted over to Salesforce DX and VS Code about a month ago, so sorry for the basic question. How did you turn on color coding, SFDX color coding in the terminal window in VS Code?
That's a good question. I'm actually not sure the answer to that.
Turn on color coding of what?
So the question
in
here...
the terminal window in VS Code, it was all color coded with all the keywords and everything. I don't get that.
I'm guessing
I think it depends on what
config setting in
bash
VS
shell
Code.
you're using, right? So
Yeah.
you're using ZSH.
There's a plugin for it. Okay.
Is there a plugin for it? Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah, I'm
that-
assuming it's something
yeah.
specific with VS Code. So yeah.
Yes. So the question was, I'm using Jenkins for my continuous integration. What are the compelling reasons to move to DX? Well, DX does not replace Jenkins. It doesn't replace Travis. It doesn't replace any other build system that you might be using. The CLI in particular is designed to function well in those environments. And so I don't know what you're using to move metadata in and out of orgs or to run your tests. Might be the Ant tool or something like that. But you would use the CLI within those environments. And so our proposition around DX is take the pieces that make sense to you, adopt the whole thing if that makes sense to you. But we're not going to be prescriptive about what tools that you use within your CI environments other than giving you the CLI to give you quick and easy, accurate, repeatable access to Salesforce. Does that make sense? Great, okay, yes. It can't yet, not fully. There's a little bit of difference in parity. Ultimately, the goal is to put the Ant tool back into 2008 where it belongs. Right.
So yeah, once we get feature parity, then the Ant migration tool will start to be deprecated.
Right.
Our project wants to take a dependency on a plugin, use it in the roadmap to have some equivalent to a package JSON to like source control our plugin with our project as a dependency.
No.
Not currently, but it's just an idea.
Haven't thought about that. That sounds like a great thing to consider. Again, record it for posterity as a feature request up on success.salesforce.com in the Salesforce DX group, and we'll take a look at it.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. We're a little bit over. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank
The
you.
amazing Thomas Dvornik.
The amazing Dave.